All right. Greetings. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are here today at the Aligned Actions for Housing Solutions, a convening sponsored by Terner Labs and in partnership with the National League of Cities. Really excited to be here. Excited also to be with all of you, both in the room and streaming. Many of our core partners, as well as many of our funders who have made this work and this event possible. Particularly want to acknowledge some of the folks in the room who have helped this to happen, including our colleagues from JP Morgan Chase, so Wells Fargo Foundation, Nathan Cummings, Citi, Coefficient Giving, Ivory, and many others who have worked with us to help put the pieces in place for this to happen. My name is Ben Metcalf. I am with the Terner Center for Housing Innovation at the University of California, Berkeley, a research center focused on delivering actionable research that can help move which brings together innovators through an accelerator program. And it is many of those innovators that you're going to get to speak with and hear from today. I'm particularly tickled that we're here also in the Prince George Ballroom in Manhattan, a project of breaking ground. In the spirit of lifting up amazing innovation, we are here in one. Not only was this building, when it was built more than a century ago, one of the first hotels in New York to include private bathrooms in each of the hotel rooms, but more recently, it was the source of a major and collective commitment to transform what had become by the 80s and 90s a vacant, abandoned building into a place for permanent supportive housing for folks coming off the street, unhoused, homeless New Yorkers. And that was, at the time, a very innovative approach to solving an otherwise very intractable problem. And the Prince George Hotel also brought with it this lovely ballroom, which brought a really interesting social venture opportunity to sort of both build collective energy around a common goal and to raise funding to support the good work that Breaking Ground does every day. It was also, by the way, where yours truly got his start in this field. It was my first job out of college, actually working here in this very building, working on this very redevelopment, which helped to make it happen. Got me fired up about the work that has motivated me for these many years and kept me going. So it's a real pleasure to be here in this space with you all. It's also a great time to be having this conversation. We are really trying to focus on sort of what is new and interesting and exciting coming up and out in the housing field that offers some potential, but really trying to stay focused on this question of how can innovation and new approaches be challenged to scale in this moment? How can we build on the sort of collective momentum and hunger for real and dramatic solutions to what sometimes feel like intractable problems to the issue of housing affordability? And my hope today is that in this space, in this room, on the live stream, both in this moment and coming out of this moment, we will build opportunities for convening across silos to really help people who don't work together day to day to find the space to do more of that, to lift up and create a facilitative ecosystem for the kind of innovation we're seeing, and really helping us think about how we go from insight, from the good ideas, which are all around us all the time, to real action and different kinds of action that can push and challenge the system for housing affordability that we work with today. So today we have two fantastic and exciting panels, one on policy in the room. We'll shift into working sessions. We have a wonderful happy hour as well. So I'm glad you're here. I think you'll enjoy yourselves. I hope you'll leave today optimistic, encouraged, and with some new friends and colleagues to do this good work. So with that, let's go. Kara, back to you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Murray-Badal. Yeah, wow, so kind and so unexpected. I direct the Housing Venture Lab at Terner Labs. I often say I have the best job in the world because in the face of this housing crisis, which is daunting and overwhelming, at a time when so many people are having a hard time, I get to work in the currency of hope with a really amazing cohort of people who are not only brilliant, but committed to taking care of people. And that begins with making sure that everyone has access to safe, affordable, dignified housing. I'm so excited to get to hear from the innovators over the course of the next couple of hours. But right now I want to talk about policy. It might seem like sort of an odd pairing, talking about policy when you're an innovation hub. I think policy kind of brings up this idea of like lagging and But I think the people who are about to join me on this panel will turn that on its head, and especially when innovation really just means changing something established, I think there's a lot of innovation to be had in policy. And research has shown us that policy can hurt, but when we are willing to make change to something established, that it can lay the groundwork for new construction. So greater sustainability and cost reduction, it can lead to the innovation that makes housing more accessible for everyone. So with that, I'd love to bring up our panelists. If you guys would join me on stage, that'd be wonderful. Thank you. Y'all can feel free to take off your name tags, make it hot for the cameras. To my direct left, I have RuthAnne Visnauskas. She's the Commissioner and CEO of New York State Homes and Community Renewal. Before joining HCR, RuthAnne was Managing Director of the Housing Advocacy Board for the Robin Hood Foundation. She's held key positions at New York City's Department of Housing Preservation and Development and served as the city's Deputy Commissioner of Development. To her left, Vicki Bean is the Judge Edward Weinfeld Professor of Law at NYU School of Law, an affiliated professor of public policy at NYU Wagner, and faculty director of NYU's Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy. That's like 25 jobs, Vicki. She previously served as New York's Deputy Mayor for Housing and Economic Development and Commissioner of the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, where she led major initiatives to expand and preserve affordable housing and advance urban policy. Jeff Lubell is the Senior Fellow at the Urban Land Institute's, you're going to pronounce the name of the center, Terwilliger Center for Housing. He previously held leadership roles at the Center for Housing Policy, HUD, and CBPP, and founded the consulting firm Housing Innovations Group. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Back to policy. It really feels like the role of policy barriers in the housing crisis is like the hot girl in the housing ecosystem right now. I'm hearing about it all the time. And that didn't really exist 5 years ago. There are an abundance of conversations happening on this topic, from zoning to land use to building permits. Here in New York, Law 97 is trying to tackle sustainable solutions. But because this is Terner, I'd like to ground us in the thing that we're always talking about, which is innovation that can scale in this space. So I would love for each of you to talk a little bit about a problem you've seen and the work that you have seen start to solve it or believe could solve it from a policy perspective. Maybe we'll start with that one with Vicki.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for putting this together, and nice to see everyone in the room. So one of the problems that I focus on most, partly because I teach land use, is the way in which our zoning system and our land use regulatory system really slows down housing, to put it mildly, makes it much more expensive, makes it more same old, and really restricts innovation. And so the thing that I'm enthused about is that we're seeing lots of states across the United States, red states, blue states, purple states, all kinds of states,
One fish,
changing,
2 fish, red fish, blue fish.
right, exactly. Changing their land use systems, or changing the systems that their local governments have to follow, right? And so we're seeing, you know, some things that have been around for a long time. Hey, you could reduce the parking requirements, those kinds of things. But we're also seeing a lot of innovation, right? New kinds of builders' remedies, new kinds of permitting restrictions that really require that you reach a decision within a certain time period, that limit the kinds of reasons that you can offer, and that are nuanced in the way that they do it. So about 22 states have already passed very, very significant reforms, and local governments across those states are trying to put them into play, and that's where we're really seeing a lot of innovation, is the cities trying to work within the new systems and thinking about things from a completely new way. So that's one thing I'm enthused about, and I think we're really seeing progress.
Awesome. Jeff, I see you nodding along. Do you want to add on there?
To her idea or to my idea?
Yeah, you're right.
Sure. I mean, I second everything Vicki said. I want to focus on a different problem, which is that, you know, we're still building housing by and large the same way we did 100 years ago. We're not taking full advantage of the potential of off-site construction to achieve the economies of scale that we really need to lower costs. And one of the big problems right now is that a lot of our modular and panelized building is really custom built. Everyone's building custom built. Everything is a one-off project. They're not building standardized projects. And one of the reasons for that is that we have an incredibly fragmented building code. Every state, a lot of localities have their own building codes, right? And so, if you had a statewide building code, or even better, a regional building code. So let's imagine that we're here in the Northeast, right? Imagine we are here in New York, right? Imagine if all of New England and the Mid-Atlantic, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, we all had one building code. And let's even call it a stretch building code. Let's say it's somewhat higher energy efficient, more energy efficient, somewhat more resilient than your standard building code. But people knew that if they could build to that stretch code, that they could then place that anywhere in New England, right? That would open up a lot of capital and a lot of opportunity for standardization. Now, that's not the only thing you would need, right? You'd want to make sure that we had common interface standards for joining components so that someone could do kitchens and baths and know that it would plug and play, for example, into other things. We would want some kind of statewide pre-approval of panels, of systems, of structures. But none of this should be that difficult to do at the end of the day. It's not costly, but if you did that, someone could open up an offsite construction plant and say, I'm going to build 1,000 townhomes for the Northeast, and I could put them anywhere, right? And they could achieve a lot of economies of scale. So that would be my challenge to us, to say, how do we rise to this moment? Let's adopt the regional stretch code here in the Northeast.
Lovely. Yeah, I mean, and I think the thing I didn't say at the start of this, which I think probably everyone in this room is very familiar with, is just the unbelievable massive need for more housing. There's problems in terms of getting a house, there's problems in terms of getting an apartment, but no matter what, we just need more and more housing. And so I think your point, Jeff, is specifically about the way that we build quickly. And RuthAnne, I wonder if you can talk about what that might actually look like in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's nice to see everyone. I would certainly say from a sort of a state HFA or a sort of a governmental perspective, we are largely tax credit housing producers, rental housing producers. And when I came into this role and I went to Syracuse and to Buffalo and to Rochester, they love tax credit housing and want that. But also in many cases we're like, I don't really want a 50-unit rental building. I really want 50 infill houses. And can you get me that? And that wasn't really sort of what housing agencies were as nimble as in terms of sort of single-family housing production. And so we have spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out how to build in places where houses appraise for $100,000 or $150,000, and it costs $450,000 to build a house. And that is true in basically everywhere in upstate New York. And so we, about a year and a half ago, started working with some manufactured housing producers to build single-family factory-built homes that are built to the HUD code. They can be mortgaged. They are, ostensibly what you would see in a mobile home park in its sort of construction. So they're not modular, but they're manufactured. Whole house comes and arrives, and within a day, it's fully together and there. And we did a pilot with 3 cities upstate to work through with their building code and sort of all the kind of city government agencies that need to come together, to your point about sort of building codes and getting things approved, to say we want to replicate this same house, not a lot of changes, kind of the same house in 3 different localities. And we got houses sited in 6 months for $250,000. And the $250,000 even includes these houses have sort of detached garages, which we have decided as we've gone into it that maybe the garage is actually kind of expensive and people only put snowblowers in garages and like luggage and not cars. So maybe we should rethink some of that. But really getting at how do we get to a house that, at least according to our sort of standard numbers we have today, that we can get in place in half the time and half the cost. And we've arrived at it with these 3. So we just launched to do 200 more this year, hopefully, and knock on something, that we will place 200 more in about 10 or 15 cities across the state that have now applied and raised their hand and said, yes, we would like 10 of those, we would like 20. And this is not just, sort of Syracuse and Rochester and Buffalo and places that have large supply through their land banks, but it is also the town of East Hampton. It is also towns in Westchester. It is places where I think we were concerned that there was sort of more NIMBYism against anything that would come in as sort of an affordable house. So we are really excited that we are going to sort of roll out what we think will actually also be sort of a sustainable, as these houses get built for $250,000, they can be sold for In some markets, 175, 200, 225. In some markets, 300,000, and they're still very affordable. I'm certainly thinking about Long Island and Westchester. So we are really excited to scale that this year, and then who knows where we can go from there.
Lovely. You talked about NIMBYism, not in my backyard-ism. And that it's just making me think about all of the other places that we build. Like, you know, New York is pretty diverse in and of itself, but there are cities all across the country that are trying to figure this out and figuring out their policy solutions. So I'm wondering how these solutions might look different in different cities and what it would take to have a more coordinated system. Maybe we'll start with Jeff on that one.
Sure. First of all, really commend New York on your Move in New York program. It's a wonderful program. They're using a type of manufactured home called a cross mod. Just so if you want to look it up, it looks just like a ranch style home, you know, so it may be built using the same standards about manufactured housing park, but it looks nothing like a double wide or a single wide. It looks like a residential home, and there's even a smaller single section model that's a little less expensive. And so it's a really exciting program, and it's a great to see the government innovating and figuring out ways to do that. In terms of what looks different in different places, I think we have to acknowledge that what's going to fit in certain neighborhoods is not going to fit in other neighborhoods. And so there are neighborhoods, right, where a single-family home works really well, but in a more urban space, certain kinds of urban spaces, you want stacked duplexes, you want townhomes, you want, you know, multifamily structures. And so part of it is going to be we have to create systems that are flexible enough to allow us to adapt to different local areas. I know this is something New York is thinking about, and like, how do we tackle that next step, the more urban environment? And there are ways to do that. You know, at some point we get beyond what the HUD code will allow. Although if plug for the bill that's going through Congress right now, right, that would eliminate.
There was a whistle in the room.
That would eliminate the chassis requirement, right? That would then make allow HUD code homes to be used to produce multi-story homes. That's going to be hugely helpful. But again, I think back to the regional building code, I think there are going to be other homes, certainly multifamily construction, where you're going to need a regional building code. So you don't necessarily need to standardize the outputs all the time. You need to standardize the process and to create a mechanism to allow for the innovation that all of you do, right? So our job in the government is to create the playing field that allows innovation to happen. And right now, motivated by incredible, I would say, you talked about NIMBY. I think a lot of this, the building code variation is motivated by laudatory goals. People want housing to be energy efficient. They want homes to be resilient, right? All of these goals, though, are creating this crazy patchwork of different systems that we have in different places that is getting in the way of private capital. Private capital needs predictability. They need standardization. They need uniformity. So we need to sort of step back from our instincts to take control, and we need to let go to actually get the outcomes that we want.
Yeah, it's kind of like you can't see the forest for the trees. We've lost the big goal with all of our smaller goals around this work. Okay. RuthAnne, would you like to join in on that one?
I mean, I certainly agree that I also, you know, as we look at housing development across the state, certainly every community we go to has an exceptional reason why they can't have the thing that or don't want and so we have tried to be super flexible, and the governor has been very focused on, like, we want to get out of the way, we want to let communities build, we want to give you tools to do things you want to do. And so I think that is sort of an important part, certainly for government, as we push out ideas, we push out innovations, is to say this isn't necessarily sort of a one-size-fits-all. This is a pilot that we're doing. You should take us up on it. If you build 25 homes in your town, that's great. You have a town that has 5,000 homes in it. This is not going to sort of rock the boat, but it does give you more opportunities, whether that's in sort of lower home price areas where there just is no new building, and so there is no new house for anybody to move into or for families to upsize or downsize, or whether it's in a really high market community where people who work in the grocery store and work in the doctor's office can't find anywhere they make too much money for a tax credit apartment if they can find one, but not enough for any sort of home ownership options. So I think we are trying to provide sort of a suite of things for communities so that they feel that we're sort of flexibly partnering with them as we're trying to push out innovative ideas. Vicki?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the issues that keeps coming up here is we are in a federalist system, and we have tended to give local governments a lot of power to do things like building code. and to vary them. And they do have good reasons, but they can also be pushed in the direction of more uniformity and convinced of the sort of value of joining together within the region with other municipalities. And so I do think that that's going to require us to push ourselves on the federalism arguments, right? That when local governments respond by saying, well, but I have home rule powers, this is in my jurisdiction, we've got to convince them that they need to do it and they'll benefit from doing it by joining together.
Yeah, lovely. And I mean, Jeff started talking about HUD code homes, which so many people think of as like trailer park homes, but that is the largest production of home that we do in the United States. And so thinking about how to expand that and do it in a way that everyone can be positively affected by it makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know. I actually want to go back to something, Jeff, you said earlier, though, and we actually had a little bit of a back and forth on this on our prep call. We had a WWF style match in the pre-call, but it was about specifically the role of government in this work and how it affects innovators. So the question was originally, what role do innovators have in the proliferation of ideas? And I think the question I'm kind of thinking about for you is, what does the government do in playing a role in clearing the way? And I think I was sort of like, well, the government maybe should be doing all of it. And if housing is a human right, then like maybe that's what it should be. And you saw it a little bit differently. So I was wondering if you could share.
Yeah, well, I don't remember what I said back then, but I can tell you what I think right now, right? Which is
I'll take it.
that, there's not enough money to subsidize our way out of this problem, right? We need private capital. We need to find a way to allow the private sector to do what it does well, right? That means that people are going to need to make money, right? And people are going to need the opportunity to create a viable business model, right? But we can get what we want, right? If we think about what are the minimum conditions that industry needs to succeed, how do we at the government level create those minimum conditions? And then what are the gaps that are then in the market where the government actually needs to operate directly? So right now what we're doing, we're subsidizing the production of homes with hundreds of thousands of dollars per subsidy, right? Because we haven't optimized for lower cost construction first. As a result, right, we're spending a lot more money than we need to per unit. We're not getting the housing that we want, right? So start by saying, how do we, again, I'd come back to a regional stretch building code that would allow offsite construction to work. I'm not saying offsite construction is going to solve every problem. It's not. There's still going to be lots of opportunity for stick building. But what it will do is give us greater standardization. It'll give us the ability to lower per unit costs, and there will still be gaps, and then we can use the remaining government money in a smarter, more efficient way to really remedy those gaps. And so in a way, that's what New York is doing with Move in New York. They have both a efficient way of construction, and then they do have the ability to put some subsidy in units to bring the units down to the level that's affordable to someone at 80% of AMI. So again, that's a great model, and would love to see other states. I know Vermont is thinking about a kind of a copycat program, which is fantastic. The best form of flattery, right? It's imitation. So, but at the end of the day, we need the public sector and we need the private sector, and they both need to be working well together.
RuthAnne, what do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, to your sort of point about subsidy, we can't be leaving $300,000, $400,000 a unit in a house for subsidy for 30 years. There'll never be enough money so to the extent that we can use this pilot to be leaving $25,000 of subsidy, and we can do that many more. And I think also sort of it is the role of, and we see it as our role and are happy to be both stealing from some states that are doing great things and also having them replicate. And that's going to continue, whether it's on sort of, I think, manufactured housing. I think also we see a lot of like panelized wall systems and other sort of modular pieces in our multifamily work coming down and having real financial impact on that. So I think having sort of examples of where that's successful for us in our projects across the state that allow other people to see where it's working and to sort of replicate that. So I think the sort of ecosystem of innovation across the states is sort of an important one.
Vicki, do you have anything to add on that topic?
Yeah, one thing I would add is we need to also think about what government can bring to the table. And one of the things, for example, that New York can bring to the table is we have a lot of housing that you can test out your ideas in and other things. And so working with government to try to find those areas where the partnership works, to provide, easy places to test something, to provide connections to academia that can, also test things and try to solve problems. So I think it requires not a sort of we versus them, the government is always bad kind of mentality, but really thinking about, well, what could they bring to the table for private enterprise?
Beautiful. And so I would love to kind of, as we're moving to the back half of this panel, just hear a little bit about something you want people to be thinking about and like what actions you think are really important right now for in this room, and this live stream is full of city officials, full of innovators, full of policymakers. And so I think I'd be super curious to hear a little bit more about what you think are the key next steps. Like if you could do something in 90 days, if you could do something in a year, what would you want to be doing?
Yeah, sure. Always happy to have this opportunity to lay out the agenda, right? But so this is a collaborative venture, right, of Terner Labs and the National League of Cities, and I've been working with mayors and city council members as part of the National League of Cities for many years. And I think when it comes to this issue of regional building codes, I actually think we really need to get the mayors and the city council members engaged, because they are the ones who could stop this from happening, right? It ultimately, there's a lot of tension in many places between cities and the states about what the state can control versus what the local government can control. And there are a lot of home rule states that are going to say, hey, you can't do this, right? But that's why I think we need the National League of Cities, we need the Conference of Mayors, we need the National Association of Counties to say, we know we have the right now to have all this variation, but we know that it's stopping us from getting what we want, which is more housing, more affordable housing, more energy efficient and resilient homes built to a stretch code. And I think if they came together, then it would be so much easier then to go to the states and say, we all want to do this, let's do it, and adopt a regional stretch code, starting with the Northeast, lots of other regions. I should say Colorado has adopted a statewide offsite construction code with some regional variation because they actually have multiple climate zones within Colorado. Utah recently adopted offsite construction statewide code. So there are examples of places that are doing this. Virginia has had for a long time a statewide code that trumps local code. So it's not impossible. We have to reimagine, though, this dynamic between local governments and states to really align around creating a productive ecosystem for innovation to happen at the local level.
I think that's really interesting because I think very often we hear like about states kind of figuring out the mandate and pushing it down towards the cities. But it sounds like you're saying that you actually think that getting the cities and the localities involved and pushing up to their state is perhaps where we should start.
Well, again, it's easier to go to the states and say, do this, and I think that we should, but then they're going to run into this roadblock right at the local level. So I'm saying, hey, let's flip the script and let's say we understand, right? I mean, think about it this way. Is it safer to drive or is it safer to be in a plane, right? There's an instinct, right, that says, oh, I feel much safer in a car because I have control, right? But in reality is it's much safer to be in a plane, right, where you don't have control. And that's the instinct that's getting in the way. It's this instinct to want to have control, to say we want the ability to set policy that is actually getting us further from the policy that we want, right? And so we have to be willing to sort of, so that's why I would say let's start with the local government representatives who stand to gain the most from this, but also have the ability to block it. Let's get them on board. Then let's go together, arm in arm, to the states and get this to happen.
RuthAnne, I'm dying to know what you think about
Well,
that.
it makes me think of sort of this conversation we've been having over the last couple of years also about accessory dwelling units, which is, very third rail for lots of places. And we took the approach, well, we took one approach, but then when that one didn't work, we took a different approach that was really about how do we give localities money to allow low-income homeowners to put ADUs in their space, whether that's an attic or basement or a cute little house in the back. And our sort of premise on that is that as more towns take us up on that, the adjacent town will say, oh, that isn't that thing that I thought it was. Oh my God, I thought that house was going to have 47 cars in the driveway all of a sudden because their attic now has an apartment in it. Or through people would say like, oh, well, my town allows that, and now my kid, I'm in Long Island, and my kid can't find, now my child or my parent is now living and it's great, or it's a source of income, or whatever the thing might be. And then as they're sort of out, other people in other towns might say, well, oh yeah, we want that too. And how can we get our town to do it? And sort of kind of getting at the, kind of ground up ask for that is sort of the approach we're at. And we've seen a lot of success. We've had more and more, I should have had the numbers, but I don't, but I think we put out about $120 million across the state to localities to assist homeowners where ADUs are allowed as of right. And ideally, we haven't seen so much change yet, but it's early. But the goal would be that as that happens over time, more towns are coming together, and eventually we could get to a streamlined code. But at least let's start with it being kind of as of right in many more places than it is right now.
So I think we're all saying the same thing in slightly different ways, and that is we have a hearts and minds problem here, and we got to bring people along, right? And from the point of view of a homeowner whose main asset is their home, it's frightening to think, well, something could change in my neighborhood, and there could be 47 cars. I'm not sure that there won't be. And I'm going to resist that because that's a threat to my retirement account. It's a threat to my ability to send my kids to college. And their elected officials are having the same fear. Well, this could work out terribly and I could lose my next election or whatever. So we have to first give a positive vision about what can be accomplished here. And some of that positive vision is really, hey, your kids can come back here. You can move your parents back here, as RuthAnne said. And some of the positive vision is you're going to want to move sometime. This house isn't going to be acceptable for you or best for you forever. And you're going to want to move. And there are all kinds of innovations that can make your house better and cheaper and can make housing available, much more available. So we need a positive message. We can't oversell, but we need a positive message about, and we need to deal with people's fears as upfront and in an evidenced, but as much of an evidence-based way as possible.
Yeah, I think you're right. We are saying the same thing, maybe in slightly different fonts, but I think there's a two-pronged thing here, which is that we have to have policy, and policy does create change, and also, as much as possible, bringing people along with us is helpful. And that in this country, we've had this long-standing vision of white picket fence with a house on a giant lot. But if you ask people what they want in their community, they want their barista to be able to live there. They want their kids to be able to come back. They want to stay in their own neighborhood as they age. And so, what are the ways that we can re-envision what community looks like, meaning that it's denser, but that we have more of the things that we want in our community? Okay, we are down to our last couple of minutes, so I think, this panel has gone for half an hour. Our attention spans are continually shrinking, so maybe if you guys can just, as we close, what is the one thing you would just like people to keep in mind in this room as we talk later, but also for the folks watching at home or in their offices? What is the thing that you would really like them to hold on to from this policy conversation?
I mean, I would certainly say from an innovation standpoint, never stop reaching out to government with crazy ideas that you think, we should be trying, because we are generally, we have all gotten to the place where we have limited resources and we need to be doing incrementally more than we're doing. So how do we find ways to do new things is absolutely sort of the game. And I think testing them out is also sort of how we're going to get to future sort of bigger policy changes for those things to happen sort of more in the market. So I definitely would say, we will continue to keep testing ideas and rolling them out, but please keep bringing us, whether it's on cost, whether it's on innovative financing, whether there's sort of a lot of ways to get at this, and we're happy to keep thinking and considering them all.
Beautiful. Vicki?
Well, we need to both have a lot of innovation, and we also need to learn from the past. And so one of the things that I find very heartening is the number of people who are now talking about the Sears Roebuck houses and wanting them back, and to say to people, that's what you're getting, right? That's what you're getting in modular homes, or that's what's being allowed in an ADU, those kinds of things is really important. And so I would ask us to look both forward and pull things from behind.
Yeah, I mean, I could say the magic words, regional stretch code again.
The magic words.
But plastics. But what I really want to actually suggest is that we don't need to all reinvent the wheel. I mean, the really exciting thing that's happening, what's different in my view now than what, at any point in the last 30 years that I've been doing this work, is there's more political will at the state level to solve these problems and to increase housing supply than I have ever seen. It is really exciting. And they, though, need to understand what they need to do and develop policies and practices and do the demonstrations of the models. They can be learning from each other. You can be working with other states, right? Imagine if all the states, for example, in the Northeast, were partnering together around, experiments. One person's trying duplexes, one person's trying townhomes, somebody else is doing cross muds, and they're learning from each other in real time, and they're seeing what works, and they're developing financing products, and they're creating an ecosystem that supports all together the ability of manufacturers to relocate to the Northeast to do offsite construction. You can see how all the states working together are going to be greater than the individual parts. And if we can facilitate that, I think we can make faster progress.
Greater than our parts. I think that's a solid note to end on. Can we give it up one time for our panelists? Awesome. Thank you all so much. With that, we are going to transition. We've been talking this whole time about innovation and Spark Talks, and so I'm going to hand it off to some of the really amazing, super cool innovators that I get to work with every day, starting with, you know them, you love them, or you're about to, Dan Hardcastle.
Thanks, Cara. It's great to see everyone here. I'm really happy to speak after that panel because what we're doing at BuildTrust is creating the financing infrastructure that can enable exactly the kinds of innovations that we're talking about, ADUs, infill, offsite construction. So to build more housing, we need to get better at predicting the future. And I'm talking about one thing in particular, construction outcomes. We need to be better at knowing whether a particular project is going to deliver on time and on budget. If you can reliably predict that, you can finance almost anything at the lowest possible cost because capital, cheap capital, craves certainty. That's what I was talking about. So this slide gets at the core tension we're talking about here. Building homes and factories, putting them in backyards or empty lots, that should be the fastest, easiest way of delivering housing. We're up to 18 states now that have broadly legalized ADU construction. New York, I believe in you, Excelsior. But we're not seeing the financing tools come online. And it's stuck in the middle. It's another middle. There are so many forms of middle housing that we talk about in this room. This is another one. When you're talking about the ADU through infill space, 1 to 10 units, and it's partly a scale problem for lenders. For single-family lenders, their focus is high volume, low margin. They don't have the time to deal with the complexities and construction risk involved in more elaborate products. When you're talking about big multifamily, we can certainly do the deep. So once we have these data and can predict the future, everything will be easy. Everything will be great. We will be able to look at a project. We'll know how long is it going to take? Is it going to be on budget? But to get to that beautiful data future, we need something that works for lenders today. We need to give lenders a reason to take the step into the space, to start doing loans today. And so what do lenders see? They see risk. They see new territory, new places to build. Backyards are not a place that we've been building housing, and in some ways we have for a long time, but not in a rigorous way. So that's a new thing. When it comes to offsite, the idea that all this activity is happening away from the subject property, that freaks lenders out. It's a new process. And the approach to tackling this so far has been many pilots all over the country, some of them backed by some of the philanthropic folks in this room that have produced, a handful of units here and there, either on the modular manufactured side or on the ADU side, but we're not seeing the kind of streamlined and cohesive data set that can really allow us to move this nationally. So BuildTrust is bringing that standardization, and we're giving lenders an on-ramp into this space. We're helping them make the initial decision. We're helping them decide, is this a project that we can do? Is this a feasible site? Is this a builder who has the track record or has the tools that they need to be able to get this project done on time? And we deal with the challenges on the appraisal side. When you're building something new, appraisers struggle to find comparable examples of it. And so we help appraisers decide the best valuation path. Once we're underway, we provide the draw evidence and milestone verification that helps offsite activity look more like the on-site construction that lenders are more familiar with. And then finally, we wrap it all into a standardized loan file and data tape that not only makes these loans more saleable for lenders who want to revolve them off their books today, but this is also where the mountain of data that will change the future of construction comes from, is from this single unified standard that allows us to view risk across the board. Better data, cheaper capital, more housing. That's what we're about here. And for folks in this room, I would say if you are a lender, either mission-oriented or otherwise, any source of capital, love to talk to you because there are ample opportunities, both from a business case, but also from a mission-oriented case to make limited public dollars go further, to make what have been kind of these scattered ADU efforts into one cohesive national approach that gives us the data that we need to de-risk these products, to get more lenders into this space, and to lower the cost of capital so that we can build what we need. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Michelle Boyd. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Terner Labs, where I work closely with Cara and Ben, overseeing and supporting our programs in this space. I am here to introduce our next innovator. I want to make one quick comment, which is that the first two folks that you're hearing on the Sparks Talks right now are our earliest stage innovators in a program we piloted this year called our Ideas Fellows. So really trying to push, really challenge the status quo and really hard to solve ideas. And I think you'll understand why we have chosen to work with these innovators, both by hearing Dan and by hearing the next one. So right now I'm actually going to read remarks prepared by someone else. Lori Schumann, who's the coach who works with our innovator who's coming up next, Kelly, is unable to be here today, but asked if we could read some remarks to introduce our next speaker. So for those of you who don't know Lori Schumann has a long career at the intersection of climate and housing, leading work at Enterprise Community Partners and at the White House and elsewhere, and thinks a lot about this issue. So I'll read her remarks. Please stay with me while I do look at a piece of paper. So climate change is no longer a distant threat. It's here, and it's reshaping the places we call home. Across the country, we're seeing fires, floods, and extreme temperatures hitting harder and more often and fueled by a warming world. And these events aren't just environmental issues. They're housing issues. They're community issues. They're economic issues. We are facing a national crisis if we don't manage this risk and establish standards, funding, and governance to accelerate adaptation to a changing climate. Today, tens of millions of homes sit in the path of extreme weather. National analysis shows that 23 million Americans live in areas facing the highest risk of extreme heat, and millions more live in floodplains, wildfire-prone regions, and storm-exposed coastlines. These hazards are converging with a housing system that is already under strain. And climate change is now driving a second crisis, the uninsurability of American homes. A recent report by the National Resources Defense Council warns that the U.S. is entering a home insurability crisis, with insurers withdrawing from high-risk markets and premiums are skyrocketing. Their analysis shows that up to 13% of U.S. homes are already uninsured, leaving families' largest assets exposed to wildfire, flood, and extreme weather, and that number is rising. When a home becomes uninsurable or physically distressed, it doesn't just lose value, it becomes a stranded asset and a loss that reverberates across generations. At the same time, we face a national shortage of millions of homes, something we've been talking about. This is one of the few issues with genuine bipartisan agreement. We need more housing, upwards of 6 million. And we need it fast. But we also need it to be safe, resilient, and located in communities where people can thrive. The challenge is not just building more, but building smarter. Invest in resilience upgrades that protect residents. These are powerful models, but they are also the exception. Most communities, especially lower income, lower capacity communities, don't have these resources, or the technical support, or the financial tools to take the next steps. They want to reduce risk. They understand the risk. They want to protect their homes. They want to safeguard their future, but they're stuck. And the federal government, unfortunately, no longer has their back. And the hard truth is that not every home can or will be saved. Some homes are already too exposed, too damaged, or too costly to retrofit. Some neighborhoods face risk that will only intensify, and when those homes fall into distress, when insurance disappears, when values collapse, families lose the foundation of their financial lives. That's why we need to widen this conversation. Yes, we need to invest in mitigation. Yes, we need to retrofit homes and harden communities, but we also need to plan for mobility. Households need to move to safer and more resilient areas. And that means ensuring that receiving communities have affordable and resilient housing available, because we cannot talk about climate resilience without talking about housing supply, housing affordability, and equity. This is the dual challenge in front of us. How do we build housing that's both affordable, resilient, and in places that are safe? And how do we ensure that families can access it? That's why we're so excited about Buy-in's approach coming up next. Kelly and her team are not just thinking about climate action and housing separately, they're treating them as an interconnected system. They're helping communities understand their risks, assess resources, and plan for futures that are safer, more stable, and more equitable. We've been proud to work with them as we've shaped our own moonshot vision for climate and housing. We're really lucky to have coaches like Lori who support leaders like Kelly. Because at the end of the day, resilience isn't about surviving the next disaster. It's about ensuring that people, especially the most vulnerable, have a place to call home. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kelly Lilani Main.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here today. And thank you to the Terner Housing Labs for accepting me as an Ideas Fellow with this very complicated and somewhat intractable issue that I'm trying to solve. So today I'm going to be sharing a little bit more about my organization, Buy-in Community Planning, and our vision to help 1 million households move to escape climate risk. Buy-in Community Planning is the only national organization that is dedicated solely to helping communities design and implement voluntary relocation programs to adapt to environmental hazards. We worked with people and communities to figure out who wants to move, ask questions around where they're going to go, and discuss what will happen to the land that gets left behind. This does feel like an immense problem, and I know many people in the room might have tried to ignore it for as long as possible. So I'm going to bring it down to the ground and share a little bit more about my friend Barbara. Barbara and her husband John bought a home in the Cherokee Forest subdivision of East Pascagoula back in the 1960s. This was before the National Flood Insurance Program existed, before flood maps existed. And at the time, it was a really lovely working class community. There was a bayou that ran through the middle of the neighborhood. Kids could catch tadpoles, go fishing. Hurricanes have always been a part of living on the Gulf Coast, and anyone who's from there really knows that. But Hurricane Katrina changed everything for Barbara and her family. After Hurricane Katrina, more than 30% of Barbara's neighbors never moved back into the community. Today, those vacant lots sit abandoned with their foundations still intact. Homeowners have not been able to rebuild those assets because of increased costs of compliance for building codes, because of rising costs of insurance, and because of threat of future storms. Barbara still complains all these years later about the mold and mildew that persists after 8 feet of water entered their homes. And today, Barbara is stuck with an asset she cannot sell and a city that doesn't know how to respond to her needs. Barbara is part of a new generation of climate migrants, or hopeful climate migrants, I should say, who are looking for options to improve the quality of their lives and the safety and security of their families and loved ones. For the last 5 years, Buy-in has been working with communities around the country to understand the aspirations of homeowners that are facing these increasing environmental hazards. And what we found might surprise some of you. Across communities in more than 10 states and Puerto Rico, 75% of households that we've surveyed are interested in moving. Almost 50% of them want to move as soon as possible and have no resources to relocate. They're essentially stranded in place, waiting for future storms, depreciation of their assets, rising insurance costs, and nowhere to go. The good news is that it's not completely hopeless. We have had some success. Here on the right is a picture of Jimmy and Cindy Jordan with our partner Susan Liley from the Citizens Committee for Flood Relief in DeSoto. we were able to work with the city of DeSoto and provide free technical assistance to the community. The city is only about 5,000 people. They've got one city manager. And in 2024, we helped our first 4 households move using FEMA funding. However, as was mentioned before, the retraction in federal funding means that we need to innovate, and it's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be with this group of housing innovators and funders working in the housing space. So what exactly does buy-in do, and how are we addressing rehousing? Buy-in community planning provides a really unique transaction infrastructure that connects homeowners who want to move, local governments, community-based organizations, and potential funders to make real concrete impacts on people's lives. We're the connecting organization that brings all of these folks together and creates new buy-in for the buyout process. I also want to say that traditionally, the post-disaster recovery dollars and the billions of dollars that are spent every year on recovery are really not being effectively channeled into rehousing solutions that are going to be permanent for the future and allow people to safely rebuild in safer areas. So we're really interested in figuring out how to leverage these government-backed liquidity events into rehousing opportunities. Our surveying work also provides a really unique demand-side data set in local housing markets that we hope mission-aligned housing developers and impact investors will use to help us create new housing and new homes for people like Barbara, the Jordans, and their families. And lastly, we're really excited about the way that we've been able to diversify funding from a variety of public and private partnerships to make sure that this is something that isn't just relegated to disaster recovery or the climate sector, but really integrates social justice, housing affordability, and environmental considerations all into one. So if you want to buy in, I'm really excited to meet some of you today. We're looking for partners to directly support rehousing opportunities in our 10+ pilot communities. Or if you're interested in supporting Buy-in's vision for a scalable infrastructure for 1 million moves, I'd also love to talk to you as well. And thank you again so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Song. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Infilla. Our mission is to make more housing happen faster. I think a reason why many of us are here today. As you know, and it was really timely for us to have the policy panel before this, policy can do a lot to make things happen. However, there's the other side of the coin, which is where you don't know what's going on the government side of the house, and you don't know how long it's going to take. And as a result, it can be quite frustrating because it's hard to predict. And so real estate developers, for them, it can cost up to $10,000 a day in soft costs while they're figuring out and waiting for their permits to be approved. And so our organization spent over 1,000 hours of doing user research with over 300+ staff and applicants in over 50 municipalities to understand the issues. So we were at permit centers, at the counter, doing project review, understanding what inspectors were dealing with, code enforcement officers were dealing with. And we learned that oftentimes agencies face similar challenges, regardless of whether it was a small mountain resort town, a small beach community, a major metropolitan, and it was all despite their best efforts. There's a misconception that government isn't trying, that they are blocking. And as you know, that is not the case. These are hardworking public servants who are oftentimes understaffed, overworked, and overwhelmed. And what we saw was that they faced similar challenges where, one, managing change is really, really hard. For example, in the state of California, there's been over 200 housing production laws passed since 2016. This is overwhelming local municipalities who have to figure out what those laws are, how does it impact their community, and how do they get it implemented. So even for large ministerial laws at the state level, it can take up to 2-3 years to actually implement these laws and bring them into effect in these communities. It could also happen at the local level. For example, in New York City, there just happened with the latest zoning code changes that are like some of the largest code changes since 1961, the City of Yes initiative. And that is really, really hard to get a very large staff to understand all these changes and to get them implemented into their processes. As a result, this cascades downhill or cascades down to permitting, where you might have differing feedback between staff, planner shopping, conflicting feedback between departments, and this adds up to 30 to 45 days for each round of review, which adds up to months of time spent stuck in the permitting process. Second, oftentimes it's not clear what the status of a project even is. You might know at a permit level of where something's at, but you might need to chase the department to understand what's going on with this permit or that permit. And a lot of the systems that are in place in municipalities only handle things at a permitting level and not at a project level. Third, and many of you guys are here today because you're policymakers, what everyone wants to know is what policies work or don't work. And it's not really clear. And everyone wants to know because we all want to solve this crisis together. However, municipalities, even though they sit on a mountain of data that would be great to analyze and take advantage of and understand, it is really hard for them to pull out of existing systems that exist today. And so that's the reason why Infilla exists. We build software for municipal and state planning and building departments to help expedite permitting and make it faster, clearer, and easier. We work with anywhere from small cities serving 16,000 residents to major cities like San Francisco to most recently the state of Delaware. And 2 brief case studies. Even though we're quite a young organization, we've had the privilege of serving some municipalities and the results are already showing. So for example, for the county of Sonoma, we were able to help them save about 40 hours per week in intake alone. That's over 2,000 hours a year. And those 2,000 hours can then be used to actually review projects and get things done. In the city and county of San Francisco, we've helped them be 3 times faster in the review of their plans. And so those are 2 of the things that we're doing. And we do that via both modular standalone tools as well as our next generation AI native permitting system. And so I'll be walking you through our permitting system in a little bit more detail. Like I said, we're built on 1,000 hours of user research, so we aim to be user-centric. And that means not just the applicants, such as the general contractors, the real estate developers, the architects, but also for the government staff themselves. So these are the planners, the plans examiners, the code enforcement officers, the inspectors, and really building tools that make sense for them and not software that was built in the 1980s or 1990s that are impossible to discern. My favorite word that they use is janky. We're also AI native and data driven and policy aware. And so what that means is, and you can see an example, we're able to show you the status of a project pretty clearly and pretty simply. Traditionally for these systems, they will just say in progress for 9-10 months, and you don't know what that means. However, we can break it down and tell you where things are at among the different departments, what's being delayed, what is being expedited, and that can really, really help from a policy perspective and a data perspective. I'll just leave with this note. Permitting feels impossible today, but that doesn't actually have to be the case. Permitting doesn't have to be that hard. And so I welcome conversations with forward-thinking municipalities and states who recognize and see this vision and want to be a part of this conversation. And I look forward to talking with you later today. Thanks so much.
All right. Can we give it up one more time for Dan, Kelly, and Jenny? All right. With that, we are at the end of Act 1. For everyone joining us from the live stream, we will be back on at 1:30 Eastern Time, which is 10:30 Pacific, 11:30 Mountain. Did I miss a time zone? 12:30 Central. Thank you for everyone for joining the live stream. I hope you'll join us for the second segment. We'll be talking about how to get capital into housing. I hope the live stream is cut. Thank you. All right.
everyone. I realize with this mic and this turtleneck, you might think I'm going to reveal a new iPhone or something, but I'm not. I would love to reveal our soon-to-be pre-approved plans for ADUs, but I don't have that yet either. But it is coming. This setup feels a little awkward, but so I'm going to try to stand still. And I'm a new deputy mayor. I'm not yet at the point where I can speak without notes, so I will be looking at my notes. But thank you all for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And be back here. I really loved this event last year and love working with so many people in the room and have had the opportunity to work with so many people in this room at different levels of government. And feel just very lucky to get to be appointed into this role in the Mamdani administration. Obviously Mayor Mamdani campaigned on such a clear message around our affordability challenges, knowing too that our housing crisis and our housing affordability challenges are so much at the middle of that. So I'm excited to take on this new role and excited to continue working with kind of the breadth of practitioners and researchers and others like you all in the room to continue kind of making progress on the immense challenges before us in the housing space. But whenever I am around Terner folks, it's very easy for me and the kind of natural inclination for me is actually to want to reflect a little bit on the earlier parts of my career at HUD, because that's where I got to know Ben Metcalf, and I know former Secretary and former OMB Director Sean Donovan is here. I got to work under a lot of great leaders at HUD, including Carol Galante, and learned so much from them. And I was kind of thinking about how some of my early experiences at HUD actually have given, and working on RAD specifically, have provided a lot of lessons for how I've been able to work with people and take on really wild challenges, but also be able to propose and work on really big and bold ideas with people, partly because of what I got to observe as a very early career professional at HUD. I'll say though, we're 60 days into a new administration. I've been sharing this with folks, but we are working on our housing plan, which will be a framework and roadmap for most of the what will hopefully be 8 years, but at least the next 4 years, and really looking at strategies and policies that kind of fall within 3 broad pillars. The first being around tenant protection and housing quality, the second being around production and really needing to produce significantly more housing and affordable housing, but also market rate housing, and the third being around really continuing to propose and innovate on land use and other growth policies that allow us to continue to unlock more housing in more neighborhoods all across New York City. Because as we know, there's been a real unequal development practice all across the city for a number of reasons. But taking a step back, aside from wanting to share some of those priorities, I wanted to share a little bit about some of the early experience I had at HUD, because when we think about innovation, it comes from people, but it also really, you have to create the regulatory environment that welcomes innovation, right? And when I was at HUD, I was immensely lucky to be able to kind of, as an early young person, get to observe leaders asking these really tough, big questions in the policy space, like how do we take public housing and Section 9 and bring it into the modern housing finance space and allow it to leverage debt the way Section 8 properties do? How should we structure all of multifamily housing at HUD? These are things Ben and Carol were working on to allow us to be able to deliver funding and loans and services better across the entire country. How can we encourage fair housing planning in different cities across America that have really different challenges, different built forms, different cultures, without scaring off capital and investment? And I was really lucky to get to watch people not only ask those questions, but then find the ways to work through and with bureaucracy to actually take those on. How many people know what 24 CFR 982 is? Okay, Sean knows. It's a part of the Federal Register that has to do with Housing Choice Vouchers Program. Do you remember what the public housing section is? 960, 24 CFR 960. But in creating RAD, one of the things that Sean and others empowered really smart people to do is go line by line in these federal regulations and really work through what is it we need to change in this part of the regulation, what do we need to change in this part of the regulation, how do we bring these things together to ultimately serve public housing residents and public housing communities better. And I don't share those numbers to, or those parts of the code or the sections to kind of be cute, but to just say that's the type of real tactical work that's required when you actually want to do big things. It's the same thing that happened when we decided to create City of Yes for housing opportunities, something that for years people said it's completely impossible to go through the entire zoning resolution, and the environmental review would be too hard and too complicated to propose big, massive changes in the zoning text. But once we made the political decision to take that on, really smart zoning experts were empowered to go line by line through the zoning resolution and ask the question, what do we need to change to unlock a little bit more housing in every neighborhood? Similarly, as a city, we've known for a very long time that our land use review process was feeding into NIMBY tendencies because of the way it was being used through the city council. The architects of the 1984 Charter Revision Commission actually feared that the way that the new land use process was being proposed would create NIMBYist outcomes, and that's what we lived with for 30 years. But we finally had the political courage to actually take on that land use process and propose changes that voters thankfully passed this past November. So I think something I've really learned and embraced is that on at least the public side, we have to be really vigilant about accepting that if something is broken, we really can fix it. And we have to be really hyper vigilant about how to fix it and committed to fixing it. And sadly, too often in government, we've operated from a place of fear, saying it's too complicated, it's too hard, it's too politically challenging, we might get sued. This is a thing I hear all the time when we're trying to fix what's happening with the housing lottery system in New York. We're operating completely from a place of fear rather than from a place of boldness and urgency around the fact that our processes are actually enabling vacant units to sit longer in the market, which we really can't do. Because often what happens is that the path of least resistance leads to the status quo. And when we're in a housing crisis as severe as we have right now, we know that the status quo is an incredibly dangerous place to live in, or a dangerous thing to accept. And I think the RAD and HUD experience is actually has lessons with that as well. RAD was created in 2012. When I was at HUD, we used to talk about the capital backlog in public housing being $27 billion. New York's piece of that was $17 billion. Today, 2025, we're living with a $78 billion capital backlog at NYCHA. And so just the inaction between 2012, housing is a durable good, we know that, but it also requires maintenance and to not fall apart. Just our inaction, even once a tool is created and kind of politically accepting that we need the tool, has created this incredibly severe challenge that is now pretty daunting and overwhelming to try to address. And I think even in passing RAD, I like to remind folks, RAD stands for the Rental Assistance Demonstration. Its first iteration was called Transforming Rental Assistance. It was bigger, it was bolder, it was proposed as a much larger way to streamline rental assistance across many programs. It was brilliant, frankly, but it didn't have the political tent it needed or the political support it needed to be bold as the moment had required even back then. So my colleagues had to bring it back and make it less scary to the public. Call it a pilot, call it a demonstration, keep it just to a few small programs that would go through this. And so it's still called a rental assistance demonstration, even though the pilot piece of it is over and more units can apply. So I think part of why I raise all this, instead of just talking about what we want to do in the Mamdani administration, is just to reinforce how, and everyone in this room knows this, how politically challenging it is to do good housing work and to kind of meet the scale of the challenge that we have in the housing space. And I think as we are crafting, and as you all are crafting, kind of innovative solutions to these challenges, just encourage everyone to think about it's not just about the ideas on the table. We also have to be thinking about the political strategies and the communication strategies and the political movements that we need to bring into the space so that innovation can actually take off and scale and be supported amongst the wide range of types of people and groups and networks that actually need to support an idea to fruition. So, unfortunately, we've learned that lesson the really hard way in New York. We are certainly behind the curve. The good thing is we've actually made immense progress in that political movement, and that's thanks to a lot of groups in this room, whether it's YIMBY groups that have formed, groups like CHBC, groups like Terner Lab, groups like the Furman Center who are continuing to kind of push the edges of ideation, but also building the political tents necessary to get good ideas passed. And we are now finally starting, I think, to catch up with the types of bold solutions that our housing crisis really calls for. But we, of course, are now implementing the things that we needed 10 to 15 years ago and really still in this place of trying to catch up in the housing space. And unfortunately, doing that with kind of, catch up to our immense housing supply challenges while also having these growing preservation challenges in New York. We have massive capital backlogs in Mitchell-Lama. As I mentioned, big capital backlogs in NYCHA, an ongoing preservation challenge within our rent-stabilized stock, a lot of need for reinvestment in existing housing while also needing to push the envelope still with our supply-side challenges. So while these challenges are indeed daunting, I am an eternal optimist and am just always encouraged by spaces like this and the folks in our industry. We have some of the most brilliant minds working on these challenges, and I just feel very lucky to get to work with so many of you and your organizations and feel really optimistic about the types of solutions that people are proposing, and I think optimistic about the fact that there's now at least a broad political tent and buy-in on the fact that we can no longer wait to address these challenges. I'm very excited, too, about being at the beginning of a new administration with a mayor who has not only a clear focus and political desire and political will to address these really immense housing challenges, but is also very politically savvy, a really amazing communicator, and I think these are kind of clear elements that we need in order to be able to meet and exceed the moment. I'll also just note one thing about the mayor and this administration in general that I've been really impressed with and excited about is this focus on public excellence and this need for government to be better and do better to serve people, and a real belief that government can and should be able to work better and have better outcomes. And so while we have these broad goals that we're going to be working towards, there's also a real focus on the detail and a real focus on holding all of our leaders accountable to not accept the status quo and not accept that any challenge is too big or too small. And I think that's an incredibly empowering position to be in. So as you all are working on big, new, innovative ideas, I also think it's very helpful for us to continue to hear about all the little things that just aren't working about the tools that we do have. And so please don't lose sight of that as well. As we're thinking about innovation, we also need to be really thinking about all the little tweaks that we have to make to the things that do exist that we know are actually feeding into the challenges that we continue to face. I think I'll leave it there. I'm really excited to get to work, continue to work with so many of you in the room. I think that there's a lot that we can continue to do together, and I'm excited to hear some of the ideas that not just come out of today, but continue to read the research that Terner Lab and others are putting out. I will say I'm really excited about the focus on building technology, because I do think that's an area we really need to focus on to innovate further in construction and building technology. But it's a prime example of where we have to think very big about the political tents needed and working with labor differently in order to get good, big ideas to be able to scale. So thank you.
All right, I'm going to bring up my colleague Ruby Bellario-Schifrin, and she can introduce herself, but really fast. I'm a big fan of Ruby's, and I really want you to hear everything she has to say. So, I want you guys to put your phones down, and in exchange, we will give you hopefully a really fun, interesting panel. Yes? Great. Awesome. So phones down, eyes on Ruby. We're doing it.
Should I take this one or that one? All right, folks, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah, you can. Hi, how's everyone doing? Okay, one more time. How's everyone doing? Yeah. I'm so excited to be talking to you guys about capital today, because in the words of the famous New York poet Wu-Tang Clan, cash rules everything around me. So I am here to introduce our lovely panel. First up, we got Julie Mahal. Do you guys want to come up here? Come on up, sit down. Oh, and I'm the Chief Investment and Partnership Officer at Terner Labs. Okay, so I'm delighted to introduce to you guys all these luminaries when it comes to capital and investment. We've got Julie Mahal, the CFO and Head of Partnership Strategy at Housing Trust Silicon Valley. She helped to establish the Tech Fund, the Apple Affordable Housing Fund, and Google's launch initiative to build or preserve affordable housing. Chris Chen is the Executive Vice President of Mission Aligned Investment at Arnold Ventures. Prior to joining Arnold, Chris was a partner at the Gates Foundation Strategic Investment Fund and a vice president at Bain Capital's private equity investment team. And Sean Donovan, last but not least, is the CEO of Enterprise Community Partners. He served in the Obama administration as HUD Secretary from 2009 to 2014, and later as Director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. And while leading HUD, among the many accomplishments, Sean served as chair of the President's Hurricane Sandy Rebuild Task Force, advanced landmark fair housing protections, and led a strategy to dramatically reduce homelessness for this country. Pretty great panel.
You missed the most important thing. I got to work with Ben Metcalf.
And Carol Galante, right? Yeah.
And Carol Galante.
Absolutely. So I wanna get right into it. You three sit in different positions within the ecosystem. We've got a foundation deploying mission-driven capital. We've got one of the largest CDFIs in the country and a more nimble place-based CDFI with deep tech roots. So how do each of you think about investing in housing innovation? Is it core to your strategy or does it sit more at the edges? And talk about what innovation even means to you. It's a very overused word. Why don't we start with you, Sean?
Okay. So really wonderful to be here, and working with Ben and Carol was one of the most exciting, and Layla, as you heard, times in my career. And one of the things that we've really been doing at Enterprise, I would say innovation is in our DNA. For those who don't know, we were founded by the kind of legendary developer Jim Rouse over 40 years ago. Jim helped to conceive of the low-income housing tax credit, helped to get it passed in Congress, and by the way, it's now the single most important way we build affordable housing in this country. So that's innovation, right? And that is who we are at Enterprise. But being honest with this room, I think it was an edge that over time we lost a little bit. And we are about to put out our next 5-year strategic plan where we are going to commit, just among friends, to reach 5 million people over the next 5 years. And so dramatically increase our scale and ambition. And we've been thinking a lot about innovation and want to put it at the center of the plan. And I think what we really come to, and this goes to the question about what does innovation look like? You know, it is an overused word. For so many people, it's this, you know, oh, it's the mad genius in the laboratory over the beakers inventing something new, right? But as we've started to think about, there's sort of the invention part of it, that when you're testing something and inventing something really new, there's the incubating of that, and then there's the scaling of it. And as we think about where we sit in that spectrum, we really are the folks that need to connect those on the ground, all of you that are inventing, with the pathways to scale, right? And we're trying to get everyone at Enterprise to ask the question, what would it take for this to get to 1 million units, right? What does it really look like, and what's that going to take? And that is the kind of way we really started to think about innovation. And I think, to go back to something many folks have said here today already, this is a moment where it is possible, right? The scale of this crisis demands that we think differently and do new things. And that is the role we want to play at Enterprise.
They're already on. Yes, wonderful. Thanks for having me. Nice to be on this panel. So Housing Trust is a smaller CDFI, but not that small, in the top 20, 25 in the country. And we work in 14 counties in the what we call the Greater Bay Area, and a little bit in LA. But we are an aggregator of capital. We bring private and public partnerships. Ruby mentioned a few that we bring to bear to help lend money to our affordable housing developers, and who are out there on the front lines doing the really hard work, working on this crisis. We think about it in several different ways. I mean, there's certainly the advocacy work we do around the streamlining and some of the problems we've heard about today and solutions we've heard about today that were super cool. And then just the technology and construction piece, which we'll talk a little bit later about how Housing Trust is going to engage in that. And then it's just the risk capital. How do we find creative risk capital? And we're doing that alongside with product development. So we talk to our customers, our borrowers, what do you need? What is it the latest thing you need? And how can we adapt with you as your needs change? And they change when the subsidy environment changes, like it has in California. And so we try to be there, and then bringing in this risk capital that we found, true impact capital, and connecting them. Like, what can we do? How do I talk to the treasurer of Apple about how they can be helpful at this moment with this product? And how can we then bring in local housing trust fund from the government, from the state of California, and blend that capital together and bring really effective solutions to our borrowers?
Hi, everyone. Thank you to everyone here, everyone online. Thank you to Terner and NLC for organizing this wonderful event. The role for philanthropy in spaces like these is really fun. We are flexible in a way that we can do concessionary capital, we can do market rate capital, and that flexibility is a privilege that I think demands that we try to find the highest and best uses for our limited funds. At the end of the day, philanthropy is a drop in the ocean. Housing, as we all know, is incredibly capital intensive. We need to activate trillions of dollars to address the shortage that we have. And so the way that we think about this is, how do we find the areas that the private and public sectors are not funding today, but need a nudge, maybe a push, to start funding into the future, right? Because that's how we get to scale. So we try to think about systematically what are the levers that we can pull on, and what's the innovation happening in those areas. Construction technology is a huge area where, if you have this new technology, venture dollars are not the right types of dollars to move a technology from completion of innovation to the first and second and third real estate development that needs to get done. But real estate investors and institutional sources of capital are also not the right source of capital. So can we try to fill that gap and bridge those solutions through PropCo investments to bring them to scale? For all the policy innovations that we talked about this morning, across the 20 to 30 states that are passing these amazing pro-housing laws, how do we take those laws that are on paper and move them from 0 to 1 and get developers and investors taking advantage of upzoning, taking advantage of land use reforms, new typologies of housing, and being that risk-taking capital to fill that gap? When it comes to solutions like scalable platforms to help lower the cost of financing for small developers, when it comes to solutions to speed up the cost of entitlements, permitting, those solutions all need capital, and unfortunately, the private markets or public sector aren't necessarily funding those at the scale they need, and we try to fill part of that gap.
Absolutely. So when you think about kind of the behavior change, lender behavior change that's needed to support innovation in this space. What are the things that you'd like to see? Like, I'll give you an example. In ADU financing, using future rental income to support an underwriting was an innovation that unlocked a lot of ADU financing. Are there things like that that you want to see or that you're hopeful on?
Yeah, I would talk about three things specifically where I think we all in the capital space need to focus. One, and Terner didn't pay me to say this, we need better data. We're not going to scale these solutions if we don't have the data to prove they're working. It's simple, but it is profound, and we are often moving so fast we don't take the time to really gather the data to do that. The second is, I think I talked earlier about that spectrum of getting to scale. I think we all need to be clear about where we sit in that spectrum, and very specifically, know when to stop doing what we're doing. Know when I've started saying in enterprise, our goal is to put ourselves out of business, right? If things are really gonna scale, we're not needed anymore at some level. And that's a very hard thing to do once something is working. And then the third thing I would do is recognize that money's not enough. We at Enterprise combine a lot of capital, but with capacity building and systems change policy. And figuring out that not everybody can do all those things, right? But figuring out how to bring those things to your products is going to be really important. And let me just use one very specific example. We built a equity platform very early in the idea that private equity platforms could kind of be helpful to housing preservation. And so we built over $1 billion of funds. We've kind of worked ourselves out of a job in some ways, right? There's now a lot more capital that is mission-oriented coming into that space. And so as we're evolving, we've created something new called the Renter Wealth Creation Fund. The fundamental idea, as homeownership becomes more and more out of reach for most Americans, particularly those that need to build wealth, rental properties should be a platform for that. And so we've built a preservation fund that does exactly that. And our first fund was concessionary capital. We're now moving up the risk spectrum to use truly market rate capital to do that. And those three things are things that we're thinking about that I talked about before. One is the data. We're actually starting to see that those properties perform better. We know that if we can demonstrate that to the capital markets, this could crowd in capital in this area. We also know that owners struggle to figure out how to do this with their residents, right? Residents need to understand. And so we've combined technical assistance and the policy change. There are lots of reasons why it's hard to do this kind of ownership. We have to SEC filings and et cetera, et cetera. I won't bore you with all of them, but there needs to be regulatory and policy change that goes with this if we're gonna scale it, right? So that's enormously important. And then the final thing is we need to make sure that we are figuring out when Enterprise's role is done and thinking about how would Fannie and Freddie take this over, right? What would truly get this to scale as a market in this country? So that's an example of how we think we're trying to model some change in our work.
You want to go?
Yeah, so generally, in us as a lender, and then also the people who invest in us, I think it's thinking about innovation a little differently in that you can take some proven solutions and adapt them is one important thing for all of us to think about, as well as thinking about risk differently. Some CDFIs have really strong balance sheets and probably could be taking more risks as nonprofits. I think sometimes we get into this bank mentality. We're actually not a for-profit bank. We could take a little more risk with our balance sheet. And so I'd love to encourage us as a community to continue to do that and take a little more risk. And I think those are two important areas I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think I'd concur with everything that's been said. I would add that I think the way to get to scale is for institutional investors, for the trillions of dollars that are flowing around the economy to identify the same things that we've been talking about and say these are investable areas that we really need to scale up. And so I guess the call out that I would put out there is for those people that are in control of those really large pools is to open your mind and be creative and think about how we have this national problem. There is so much innovation happening at the kind of ground level, and how do you think about being creative, being open-minded about opening access to those pools as a means of scale?
Great. So we're circling a lot around this conversation about risk too, right? And risk appetite and your risk profile and where you fall on that spectrum of risk. And so I am curious, both, do you think as an industry that your organization is in the right level of that spectrum? How would you push them? And how do we think about this on an ecosystem level? Like I'm thinking, Chris, we can start with you even, like at a foundation, as someone who has also worked at a foundation, 5% payout, is that enough? Like, should we be saying we want to take out more risk by spending more of the billions of dollars that we have in endowments? Do we want to think about the balance sheet that CDFIs have? Do we want to think a little bit more about, rainy day funds? Like, this is a rainy day. So I'm curious about how you think about risk in this moment.
Yeah, we are as an organization trying to be as aggressive as we can be. My principals, John and Laura Arnold, won't brag about it much themselves, but they are the only signers of the Giving Pledge that have actually given away more than half their wealth within their lived lifetimes. And I think, to the senior leaders of other philanthropic organizations, other nonprofits that are here, I think the ROI on doing things early pays dividends down over time, right? There's a lot of value to making a bolus of investments now that can really mitigate the amount of spending that needs to be spent in the future. And that's the philosophy we take into things. The effects of building more housing, of building wealth for families compound over time in a way that necessitates that we act urgently now.
Julie?
I love that. That's wonderful. One thing I would encourage, what we're looking at, and I would encourage people who invest in this industry to look at, is invest in an industry that is measuring their risks. They've got the data. They understand their risks, and then can communicate it to you. And so we're working pretty hard on having that mindset. And then when you do that, you can actually jump in and say, I know exactly what the risk is. So I think that's a super important part for both CDFIs and then those who invest in us to think about. And yeah, we could probably go on and on. A lot of us are rated by S&P and by Eris, and they know us well, but we are nonprofits, and so we don't want those ratings to stop us from taking risk, right? And I've even said before, like, if my rating goes down, that's fine. We really need to be acting quickly and getting in there now with our rainy day funds, and this is the emergency, so.
Yeah, so first, Chris, thank you for that. And we have partnered with Arnold. I do think one of the things that is unique about the work that Arnold is doing is on the capital side, but also really understanding the policy change that sort of all aspects of the ecosystem that need to change. And the work, particularly on zoning, has been really powerful to try to build the coalitions and the kind of cultural change that needs to happen around the country. And I do think for enterprise, we understand that this is a moment, I date myself, I've been working in housing for 30 years. I've never seen an alignment because of the scale of this crisis. And most importantly, I think it's deeper than we've ever seen in this country, but it is broader. And that's what's really changed the politics. It is everywhere, in rural and urban communities, north and south, red and blue. And so we are stepping up, and we are going to commit more of our own capital and use our balance sheet more aggressively in this moment. But I also think we have to be honest that, innovation is going to be incredibly important. We have a housing affordability breakthrough challenge that, we love what Terner's been doing. We're trying to find the innovations that are happening on the ground. And it is really important to understand where risk is misperceived, right? Where people believe there's a risk and you can invent something and change the calculus and unlock capital. But there's some things that innovative capital isn't going to change, right? And at that point, you do need, and we've talked about it a lot today, you need a government that's willing to step up and say, no, this is something we ought to be investing in as a country. And then you need to marry those two. Again, I started on the low-income housing tax credit. That is a very good example of an innovation in capital and the private sector coming together with government. And I think we all need to be clear in the work that we're doing how much of the innovation is going to get at those risks that can be unlocked and how much is just risk that is, at the end of the day, no amount of innovative capital is going to help somebody making $10,000 a year afford housing in this country with no help, right? And we have to be real about that too.
Absolutely. I think one thing I heard all three of you kind of say in that too was there needs to be more of a conversation of what risk sharing looks like across industries with government, CDFIs, foundations. How do we collectively pool that risk as we think about investing in more innovative solutions? So my last question for you is, what are you excited about? You could talk about some of your work. Like, is there an opportunity or things you're working on right now that you guys are excited about? And Sean, why don't we start with you?
How long do we have?
I know you already named a bunch. That sounds
Look,
great.
a ton of stuff I'm excited about. Construction innovation, the coalition that's building around zoning and regulatory reform. Like, all of these things are great. Maybe I'll call out a few things that haven't been raised so far. Ironically, one of them is energy. And speak about it, don't let a crisis go to waste. Some folks may know, we won $2 billion of greenhouse gas reduction funding from the Biden administration, which we're now fighting in court over. So there's lots to be depressed about on the energy side. But the fundamental shift where we are in a rising energy demand economy, data centers and a few other things, there is a real opportunity. Think about the number of rooftops represented in this room and among our partners, especially at a time when the headwinds on utility scale, wind and other things. Every rooftop is a place to generate power in this country, every parking lot. And I think we're certainly talking to our partners about what could we do to really drive renewable energy generation, and what are the funding sources that could come to affordable housing as a result of that. And let's be clear, we have an affordability crisis that has been driven by insurance rates and costs going up. Utilities are the next shoe to drop, and we all have to figure out how to harness that crisis and turn it to advantage for affordable housing. So that's one area that we're really working on that we're excited about. I talked about the Renter Wealth Creation Fund. I really think, in addition to zoning and other reform, we ought to be thinking a lot about adaptive reuse and innovative use of properties. We have a huge faith-based development initiative we were just talking about. That could be 1 million units. There's 1 billion square feet of empty office space in this country. We've actually been talking to Arnold a bit about if there's some innovative capital that could really unlock the uncertainty around those projects and get their zoning reform. You heard Layla talk about that. Retail conversions. Retail was changing before COVID. It's really changed now. We think it's over 1 million units that could come from empty strip malls in this country. So there's a lot of thinking about how do we take this moment of fundamental change in the way we work and the way we live to create new opportunities.
Chris, why don't we go to you?
Sure. I would say on the construction innovation side, I loved the mention of cross-mod of manufactured housing on permanent foundations this morning. I think the Move in New York program is great to see. We are really interested to see how we can go from 200 government kind of provided units to thousands, tens of thousands through the private sector, and looking to partner with developers in that space. within specific kind of multifamily technologies, I think there's a lot of innovation in the panelized construction space that we're looking to actively promote and scale up. On the kind of thesis I described around bringing zoning reforms from 0 to 1, I think this is an area that I am trying to shout from the rooftops to encourage investors and developers to get behind, right? In the wake of policy innovation, there is market opportunity. There is dollars to be made. One of the areas that we are looking at intensely is some of the reforms in California around Senate Bills 684 and 1123. These enable ministerial review of lot subdivisions, where you can cut up a backyard into 6 or 8 or 10 parcels, build townhomes. And the private markets have been hesitant to fund these to date because a host of good reasons. You don't know what the ministerial review process looks like. Does the 60-day shot clock actually mean 60 days? How are local jurisdictions going to respond? What are the comps for a townhome in Palo Alto? I don't know. No one's built one in 40 years. So can we be the risk-taking capital to help drive that forward, to build those first 10, 50 townhomes and crowd in private sector capital to go do that?
Can I just add one thing that I haven't heard mentioned today? A lot of the work that we're doing around construction innovation, completely agree with everything that's been said. One area we find our partners struggle with there where I think innovative capital could really help. Basically, you can get an advance on a construction loan every time you put a piece of a project together on the site. In a factory, that's inventory. And lenders do not look at inventory the same way they look at a project in the ground, right? And we should be able to change that in innovating around finance. So that's one additional area we think is really important to unlock this.
Totally agree with that.
Go ahead, Julie.
My ideas on that too. So a couple of things for us, and is that our time we have left? So I'll talk about two. One is our Building Impact Initiative, which is the follow-on of Tech Fund, and we hope that we can just continue to bring in corporates, philanthropy, banks, to all work together and blend that capital, that patient capital that our borrowers need, the developers need, and kind of grow that group, grow the pie, not try to divide it up more. So we're really excited. We've launched that. We're going to raise $200 million in the next 3 years in that fund. And then on the other innovation side, people do ask us, well, what else are you doing in innovation besides the capital innovation, our help with advocacy? And we are a $400 million loan fund with 35 people, so it's relatively limited. So we've asked ourselves, we have some risk capital, some rainy day funds available, and we're very excited to say that we're going to be one of the first investors in the Joist Fund, the Terner Center Joist Fund. And we got $1.5 million approved. $1 million is set, and the other $500,000 is for another CDFI to match. So there are some around the room.
We should talk.
Yes, and to your point, I think a follow-on to that, we're thinking about the investees and how they do need that kind of capital. They need inventory, which is it is a traditional bank line that you can get if you're a corporation with lots and lots of profitability, but how could maybe CDFIs get together and get a loan product for those investees and others to enable their scaling? And what we really hope to get out of all this is one or two scaled solutions with a lot of investment that will solve some of the problems we talked about today and some of the neat initiatives we heard in the Spark Talks today.
Absolutely, thank you. So as you guys have heard on this panel and even earlier today, we have ideas, we have entrepreneurs, we have policy momentum. We still kind of lack or need more of that mission-aligned capital to invest in these housing solutions. Too many promising ventures get stalled between pilot and scale because they are too early for traditional real estate investors or don't have the hyper-growth that traditional venture usually wants. But the opportunity is enormous. A new generation of founders, some of which you've heard here today, are developing solutions that can make housing more affordable, more accessible for everyone. And so that's why Terner, for those of you guys who don't know, we're pushing the envelope and we are launching a fund, the Joist Fund, to invest directly into companies that are expanding supply and lowering costs. We're primarily looking at companies that are helping to reduce friction on the permitting side and entitlements and work directly with governments, lowering construction costs through construction tech companies, and some opportunistic investments that take advantage of enabling conditions that have changed, like the ones Chris mentioned, where policy environments can create market opportunities. Terner has been working with policymakers, researchers, practitioners for a long time now, and we've been able to build a track record where we can find solutions early and help them navigate the industry and regulatory barriers to get to success. But what makes this fund unique is not just Terner, it is our network. It's all of you guys in this room and online, because you are the change makers. You are the people that we want to partner with. Our approach is uniquely collaborative because, as you guys know, and as Sean said, capital alone is not enough for these companies to succeed. We need to be kind of all in on this. We need to experiment. We need to take risk. So we're asking that you guys take it together with us. So if you are an investor or potential LP, come talk to me. If you're government, we want to partner with you to adopt and scale some of these solutions. If you have a fund and want to co-invest, let's build this pipeline together. If you're a lender or a foundation that has non-dilutive capital, let's talk about the full capital stack that's really needed for these companies to get to success. And if you're a founder, looking or having a solution that helps expand supply and lower costs, come find me. Because if Joist is successful, it's not just our win. It means more housing that is affordable and sustainable. And that's a win for all of us. And so thank you guys so much. And thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
One more time for the panel. Thank you, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Amazing. And Ruby said the magic words that brings me back on stage, which is innovator. So we're going to bring out a couple of our innovators now. We're going to bring up community rebuilds, followed by project own. And then we have a special little case study hosted by Councilmember Tiffany Thomas, sitting right in front of me there, where we're going to talk about home ownership and shared equity. I know it's a very hot, spicy topic, so Tiffany's going to guide us through that. But first up, community rebuilds.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Oh, you got it. My name is Nancy Morlock, and 14 years ago, I built a home with a little nonprofit in Moab, Utah, and I'm here today as their program manager.
Yate Aroheha. My name is Tara Benali, and I am the chair for the Community Rebuilds Navajo Nation Housing Housing Committee. I want to acknowledge that we are here on unceded land. Manhattan, or the place widely known as New York City, lies on the contemporary and ancestral homes of the Canarsie, Bonsi Lenape, and the Wappinger people.
We're working to build sustainable and affordable homes and to improve building capacity on tribal lands. Community Rebuilds will create a replicable program to build homes and build builders, improving lives and communities. We'll start with a 3-year pilot on the Navajo Nation, creating sustainable and affordable homes, construction job training opportunities, and permanent jobs.
Indigenous communities face some of the most severe housing shortages in the U.S. Additionally, 40% of homes are inadequate. Overcrowding and substandard housing directly impact health, education, and family stability. Imagine the impacts of living in a home like this one. The Navajo Nation, the largest sovereign nation in the United States, faces challenges similar to those faced by many other indigenous nations. There is a pressing need for more than 34,000 homes. One of our many challenges is that my homeland covers 3 states, and is home to over 400,000 Diné people, making traditional non-native solutions very difficult. Additionally, our young people are facing unemployment rates as high as 50%. The Diné people need to work with others, attract resources, and increase our own capacity to address this huge, sustainable, and affordable housing challenge. The community rebuild model does exactly that.
I can attest that building a home with this program empowers families, fully integrating them into the process. Building with this program has been a huge turning point in my life. I've been able to stay in a town that I love and now give back to the surrounding community, working at community rebuilds and helping others to get homes. Since 2010, we have built over 80 energy-efficient homes and graduated more than 1,000 building interns. We've also already completed a successful pilot on the Hopi Reservation years ago, building 4 homes there. We have the tools, the curriculum, culturally appropriate plan sets, and a proven program. We also have a partnership with Diné community members who serve on our subcommittee.
With support, we will transform lives by providing sustainable, affordable home ownership opportunities in areas where they are most needed. At the same time, we will equip young builders with valuable, marketable skills. These builders will then create jobs, construct additional homes, fortify their communities, and provide better opportunities for their families.
We're seeking $1.5 million to create lasting change over the next 3 years. With this funding, we will provide 12 families with safe, sustainably built, affordable homes, train 30 emerging builders with real job-ready construction skills, create 6 permanent local jobs, keeping skills and wages in the communities, and launch a replicable program of change that can scale to other tribal and rural places and help those communities thrive and heal.
We live in a world built on a debt that must be repaid. Indigenous nations have borne the cost of progress since first contact over 500 years ago. Now is the time to invest in Indigenous communities, support self-determination, and help restore what has too often been taken. Giving back is not a charity. It is a responsibility, an equity, and an opportunity to build a more just future for all. Ikiaha, Yate, beauty to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is AJ Proten, and I'm the co-founder of Project Own. We built a digital tool called Rooted to address preventable mortgage denials. In 2023, nearly 300,000 people were denied a mortgage due to credit or savings, even though they had enough income. The people denied were disproportionately Black. Financial coaching is a proven solution to these denials. The Urban Institute found that coaching drives increases in both credit and savings. The question is, how do we distribute this proven solution to mortgage seekers when and where they need it? There are nearly 1,400 HUD-certified housing counseling agencies across the country. These agencies are perfectly positioned to address these preventable denials. But the system is overwhelmed. Most agencies only have capacity to meet with someone once, and the people who need the most support often fall through the cracks. The mission of my organization, Project Own, is to build new tools for Black wealth creation, starting with homeownership. That's why we built Rooted, to scale financial coaching through technology. Rooted allows housing counselors to serve more clients, it decreases the number of people who fall out of the pipeline, and it eliminates data loss during the process. Rooted reduces prep work by streamlining the intake and document collection process. It also makes it easier for counselors to identify the barriers to mortgage readiness that are found on the credit report and bank statements of their clients. Together, this can save counselors up to 83% of the time that they spend on prepping, which means more time spent in appointments actually helping folks get mortgage ready. Rooted also streamlines follow-up. In a recent survey of our aspiring homeowners, the majority reported that they would like to meet with a counselor 3 to 6 times over a 6-month period, but agencies only have capacity to meet once. Rooted works to solve this problem. One of our counselors told us she can still only meet with her clients 1 time, but Rooted allows her to follow up via text message, asynchronously, which is especially important for the clients who need extra support to get mortgage ready. She actually liked this feature so much that she asked us to build a mass texting feature so she could do the same thing with her group counseling cohorts. Rooted also fixes broken HUD reporting systems. A senior HUD official told us that up to 40% of counseling agencies are underreporting their outcomes to HUD. To make matters worse, these agencies are spending dozens of hours every quarter trying to fix this problem and recover lost data. This means that agencies are not only losing their funding, but they're also losing time that could be spent counseling clients and serving their mission. So Rooted works to solve this problem by directly collecting all the data that you need for your 9902 HUD reporting and automatically syncing it into the systems that get it into HUD. So far, Rooted's working. Since we launched, we've served over 1,600 households across 4 states and Washington, D.C. 312 have become homeowners. Of clients who pulled their credit scores multiple times, 2/3 reported an increase of an average of 47 points. But the thing that I'm the most excited about is our counseling partners report saving up to 13 hours per week on average on file prep, admin, and reporting. We're very excited about these early results, and yet we also feel like we're just scratching the surface of what's possible. Different stages of the homeownership process require different levels of support. Some are high touch, some are low touch. From establishing credit, maybe when you're 18 years old, to mortgage readiness coaching if you need it, all the way through to home buyer counseling, refinancing, home sales, and even estate planning to make sure that that wealth stays in your family. We want to make sure that experienced housing counselors have best-in-class tools like Rooted to make sure that these aspiring homeowners get the right level of support at the right time. This is Denisha. She's one of our counseling partners in Boston. And she told us, Rooted is an answer to prayers for our small team who wants to have big impact. We'd like to multiply that impact by thousands of housing counselors across the country. And in doing so, we'd like to eradicate preventable mortgage denials and equalize access to homeownership and wealth creation. Thank you all for being here, and especially thank you to the Housing Venture Labs team and our coach Brad, who've been amazing supports over the last 6 months. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon. Oh, we can do better than that. Y'all have had some coffee and some tea. Good afternoon. And for those of who are watching online, the energy is full in the room. Y'all have to make sure you got to make them jealous. They're watching online. I'm Houston City Council Member Tiffany D. Thomas, and I am Chair of Housing and Affordability. I must take a moment of personal privilege to acknowledge that today is the one-year anniversary of the late and former Mayor Sylvester Terner. He appointed me as housing chair right in the midst, and Secretary, you could appreciate this, when we were receiving our Hurricane Harvey recovery fund package to the city of Houston, and in that moment I thought we had some beef when he appointed me that, but he gave me confidence to leverage the gift that I have to lead housing initiatives in the city. So it's apropos that I mention him on this day, because also under his leadership, and you'll hear more about this with our panelists, we leveraged a $121 million bond where we invested $25 million of that in our Houston Community Land Trust. So the legacy continues to live on. In my other world, I'm a tenured faculty member at Prairie View of Community Development. So I always start my class off with definitions, okay? So we're gonna manage the learning environment today. I wanna talk about shared equity. And I think it's important once we have this conversation, because we are talking about innovation, that we're coming to the same place, understanding the same definition, so we can meet the moment together. So one shared equity is it's a home ownership model where the buyer shares ownership, benefits with another partner. Now, as an aside, I purchased my first home. It was $68,000. I know you're jealous. I know you're jealous. And it was an FHA loan, a 203K loan. How many are familiar with 203K loans? Okay, of course, yes, yes, yes. So I was able to invest in an existing model, rehab that model, have that financed within my loan, which created equity for myself. But I was almost on my own with that. With the model that we're gonna talk to you about today, homeowners are joining with public agencies and nonprofit organizations that's helping them create permanent pathways of affordable housing and an asset that they can attain and then also transfer it on to their families to create generational wealth. As the Secretary mentioned, data is so important, and the data tells us that Americans still want to own a home. That is a part of the American dream. But the reality is that affordability is challenging every major city, small city, town, and we even heard about our indigenous brothers and sisters, how affordability and the access to that is so limited. And so today I want to introduce to you two panelists that are pioneering a way around affordability for all Americans. I want to introduce Devin Culbertson, the VP of Innovative Finance with Grounded Solutions Network. All right, Devin, come on up. And next, Brian Elbergen, CEO of Jubilee Homes. Okay, Brian has the cool socks. I have the cool shoes.
Orange.
Yep.
Jubilee orange, everyone.
Yep, and gold. So we're
Check your gift bags.
We're gonna have a good time. So let's just get right into it. We've talked earlier about innovation on financing, innovation on permitting and codes and what local government gets to do. Share with the audience a little bit about what the model that you're offering to Americans all throughout the U.S.
That's great. Thank you, Tiffany. Best hype woman I've ever had, so thank you for all of us for that. By introduction, I'm Brian Elbergen. I'm the CEO of Jubilee Homes, and we're making homeownership more affordable and accessible by being able to turn any home into a fair and flexible leasehold. And so we'll talk about what that means in the context of for-profit solutions, not-for-profit solutions. But just to give you a quick overview on how this works, as Tiffany mentioned, and I won't belabor the point because I think everyone already appreciates this, traditional homeownership is broken. It has never been so unaffordable to afford a home in the traditional sense, where you go from a 100% renter to a 100% owner. What hasn't changed is the desire to still become a homeowner and get those benefits of homeownership. And as you can see here, 89% of people still see a long-term vision of becoming a homeowner. So the question is, why does there have to be this clear demarcation between I own nothing or I own everything and the big wall or the cliff that prevents you from getting from one side to the other? What on-ramps exist that can transition from one place to the other where you own some of something, which is better than nothing? And the question is, where do these models already exist? Because what I appreciated from the conversations with our other capital partners is it's really hard to do stuff that's brand new. And so how do you take existing product, existing infrastructure, existing use cases, and make them bigger and scalable? Well, one concept that we can use is a concept called a leasehold. And so a leasehold, for those who are not aware, a leasehold is simply where the owner of the land is different than the owner of the building on top of it. What you may not realize is that there are leaseholds everywhere. There is approximately $1 trillion of commercial real estate leaseholds in this country. When you go outside of this building and you look up and you see the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building, guess what? Those are on leaseholds. When you go through a drive-through for Starbucks or you get your Chick-fil-A sandwich, guess what? That's a leasehold. And so this idea where an operator of a business wants to build a building or run a franchise, the reason that they don't want to own the land is because if you don't have to own the land, you need less equity and you're able to afford lower monthly payments. Those are the same things that we're trying to solve in housing. Lower down payment, lower monthly payment. And so the question is, how do we do that at scale? If this already exists in places like the Chrysler Building, if this already exists for residential properties, Stanford University has leasehold properties for all of their professors who buy houses on Stanford land. They pay rent to Stanford. And so how do we take that infrastructure? If people can buy and sell a house, if they can get a mortgage on a leasehold property, why can't we do that everywhere where home prices are expensive? And that's what we're doing at Jubilee. We make it possible to buy a house, any house, in an expensive market as a leasehold property. You buy the house, we bring the cost for the land, and you can buy the land when you're ready. What does that actually mean? When you own the house, you legally own the house. You get the benefits of owning the house. You get to get a normal mortgage like a normal homeowner. You build equity by paying down that mortgage and sharing in the appreciation of the property. You get tax benefits. It's owning a house. What does leasing the land mean? Well, if anyone's ever rented, you know what renting means. It means that you're earning the right to use something, but unlike your traditional landlord, we make it possible for you to buy that land at any point in time, so you're in control. So what does that actually mean? What's the value? By doing this, by taking away the cost of the land, we can lower the cost to get into homeownership, and we can lower the down payment, and we can lower the monthly payment. So this is an example on a $1 million property that you could buy today in the traditional way with a $50,000 down payment and a $7,600 monthly payment. That is really hard for most people to afford. Yes.
For most, I
yeah.
think.
For some people, with Jubilee, you're not buying a $1 million property. You're buying just the house. And because of that, we can lower the down payment to as little as $17,000, and we can lower the monthly payment at the same time by $1,500 a month, including the rent. So we have created this pathway for lowering the down payment and lowering the monthly payment at scale. And what does that mean? This is not a pilot. This is not a, hey, we can try this with a couple houses. This is an institutional capital solution that already exists in commercial real estate. And when you talk to private capital partners like this, they say, hey, this is great. Can you do $1 billion of it yet? Because that's the size that we're looking for. This is a solution that enables 15 million additional households to afford to buy a house and get on the path to homeownership. And by the way, it's not the only solution, because it does work in complementary with not-for-profit solutions, because we can't solve the problem for everybody.
Excellent. Hey, y'all. Devin Culbertson with Grounded Solutions Network. Thanks, y'all, for being here. Thanks, Terner, for having us. So Grounded Solutions Network, we're a national network of about 300 member organizations. Most of those are housing providers, and nearly all of them are working on shared equity. Some of them have been doing it since the 1970s. And amongst the many ways that we support them, one of them is Homes for the Future. And what the Homes for the Future is really focused on is building the pipeline for those organizations to grow and scale their impact over time. Before I get into what the mechanics of that actually are, I just want to note the trajectory we're on in terms of the problems we've been talking about today. We've heard a lot about the point in time and where we are right now in terms of the severity of the problem. But we have to recognize that that's a long arcing issue. It's taken a lot to get us here. It's a generational problem. And it's going to take long-term solutions to put it back in order. We know that that asset prices are escalating faster than incomes. That's been true for a long time. Renters are under increasing burdens, and it's harder and harder to make that jump. So where we're really focused is on the 14 million single-family rentals that are in portfolios across the country, large and small. So what we do is we assemble capital that's nimble and ready to acquire quickly, so we can be opportunistic, because I think most of the folks in this room know the fast money gets the good deals and the slow money gets what's left. So we're focused on buying well, making some of the money on the buy side, and focusing on building that pipeline for those 300 organizations across the country. After acquiring those single-family portfolios, we rent them affordably, we service our capital, we pay down the acquisition. But in particular, we're looking at acquiring in places where income is growing, so that when we sell, we can disaggregate that portfolio that we bought that was not available for individual owners and sell those individually, so that those low-cost homes are now available for individual buyers. And when we do that, we return capital to our investors. Importantly, when we're selling those homes, we're selling them into shared equity programs. So those homes stay affordable over time, they build wealth over time, and the impacts continue to compound long after the investor's been repaid. So where we are today is looking at the impact of those homes, how we scale that, and I'd be remiss if I say that we're not looking for capital, because it's an incredibly capital-intensive business. When we look at that capital and project the impacts, we look at the number of units that we can take from that single-family rental space and bring them back to individual ownership. We, of course, look at the returns to investors. But we also look at the value that's created in community that stays there to compound over time. Chris was just saying on the stage that, those early investments compound for generations. And so those are the sorts of investors that we're looking for.
Okay, we can clap now. And their information will be available, and y'all are willing to share your slides, that's right. So let's go ahead and jump right into some questions. You've talked about the benefit of the model, but let's talk about the trade-off, right? So as we're absorbing this information, and for those of you in the room that this is your first time hearing about this model, and they want to go to their community, or even an elected official that's looking to champion an affordability strategy, what are some of the trade-offs? And then let me toss this in the question as well, the nuance of land from a cultural perspective, right? So we just heard from our Navajo sister who was talking about the land and preserving that land. And when we talk about how land ownership is interpreted in many communities, how are y'all navigating that to still offer a model where home ownership can be acquired?
I'm happy to go first. So if I summarize sort of one of the key distinctions between our two program styles, ours is a market rate solution, right? Market rate pricing has certain benefits, it also has certain drawbacks. One of the biggest benefits is scale. This is something that fits neatly into existing capital market solutions. It looks like a mortgage from an infrastructure perspective. It works with the largest private capital investors in the world. It's a long-term investment that's really boring and really safe and over really long periods of time, tracks long-term inflation, which is something that every retiree pension fund needs, every life insurance company needs. So just the scale of the solution, I think, is the reason to say we need to bring private capital to the table, whether it's this solution or other types of solutions, because that's the key to scale. The challenge is that it can't solve all problems. This is a solution, when you can see our example, great, we have lowered the cost of home ownership in Alexandria, Virginia to $6,000 a month. And that is extremely helpful for the main part of the bell curve, if you want to call it workforce housing, but it's not going to solve for a 60% area median income, for example. The other thing it doesn't do is it doesn't create permanently affordable housing. This is a solution to create and share wealth with a market-based solution, but that home value increases at market rates because the return profile comes from market appreciation. So there are drawbacks from that perspective. From land, just to answer that real quick, we've done a lot of research on what makes fractional ownership or shared ownership go well and where do things go poorly. And I'd say the two things that are really important is alignment. Where do you have outcomes where people have the same shared goals versus divergent outcomes? That can be a place where things go poorly. And two, how do you exit the opportunity? How do you give control to a homeowner so that when they want to combine the two back together, they're in control for that? If you look at the United Kingdom, if you look at Hawaii, if you look at Baltimore, there are examples where those programs for affordability had good intentions, and certain product features probably made it so that it wasn't as constructive in the end of the day as it could have. And I think learning from the past, is an important part of private market solutions too.
Devin, go ahead. I want to give you a chance to answer.
Yeah, so it's been great to get to know Brian and the Jubilee model, and I really do think that they sit nicely, kind of side by side, where they're working with a kind of a higher income, maybe higher wealth consumer. A lot of the affiliates within the Ground Solutions Network are focused on folks that are more middle income and lower wealth. And so I think that there's a spectrum of housing solutions that we need, and I think that there's a lot even within the shared equity slice. When you talk about not owning your land and what that means for places, I think that that's been true. That's certainly true for cultural communities in different places. We both live in Texas. We know how folks feel about that. We've talked to so many folks across the country with histories of contract buying and concerns about what it means to have kind of a complicated relationship around ownership. But a lot of that changes, one, around familiarity, right? So the more these models build, the more the folks know somebody who's lived in a house like that, understand the model, the more comfortable folks get over time. And I think in the context of a lot of our members, it matters who's on the other side of that contract. Who owns that land? Who owns the land underneath your home, right? And in the case of most of our organizations, that's a nonprofit community-based organization that you have the opportunity to be represented on the board of, right? And so there's a way that who is the other part of that really can change the way that's perceived. And in terms of the benefits, I think it's also important that in those nonprofit models, it does mean permanent affordability. And it means permanent affordability not in a unit, but in a place. Right. And so it's that particular home in that community that not only stays affordable for ownership, but an ability to build wealth. And so the things that folks see kind of being removed from their communities as things change and opportunities become more fleeting are able to be anchored in those places.
No, and I'm glad that you brought that up around the model and how there are two distinct models, a nonprofit model and then a market model. And then in the city of Houston and Harris County, we're actually working on our first ever comprehensive housing strategy plan where the land trust model is in the room. So we're exploring how we create permanent pathways because we have to offer people options, right? Up to that point. So when you think about the future of home ownership, and both of you have alluded to this, what do you see? I know every panelist has responded to that question, but when we're looking at affordability, and every U.S. mayor, county judge, executive, council member, nonprofit housing executive, they're grappling with what does home ownership look like? Should we do more multifamily? Do we go land trust? Are we offering increased stipend around down payment assistance? From your perspective, what do you see as a possibility?
If I go back to where I started in my early remarks, which is having this middle ground between owning nothing or owning everything, and there being a growing size of the pie by bringing more parties to the table, by sharing some of the benefits and sharing some of the costs, I think is a win-win for everybody. I think it's true for supporting existing housing, but I also think that's true for creating new supply. So being able to bring multiple parties, some that are shorter-term investors that think about development, it's a very high-risk, high-return, short-term investment strategy, with longer-term investors who say, I want a safer part of the strategy and I want it over a really long period of time. That model works really well for building multifamily apartments. It works for building office buildings. There's no reason that strategy couldn't also be used to create additional supply, whether it is owner-occupied working with home builders, whether it's a build-to-rent type strategy. Those are different models where you can apply a more optimal financing solution to help create more supply, which benefits everybody.
Yeah, I think two things about the future of housing. One is I think that we've come familiar culturally with the two options. Yep. Those are not inherently simple options, right? The single family mortgage market is not obvious and easy, right? It's just something that we've gotten used to, and we have folks to lead us through it. So I see a future with more options, but well-defined and familiar, right? And so, at Grounded Solutions, we worked for years with the GSEs to get them familiar with the product so that there is a standard shared equity product, right? So you can get that mortgage. So I think that we're going to have to sort of go from this proliferation of new ideas to what that third, fourth, fifth option might be, but a limited set. The other thing is I think the future might look a little bit more like the past, where we think about our housing as shelter first, yep, and maybe an economic asset second. Yep. Where we think about building wealth through that by paying down our mortgage over time and not kind of the recency effect of hyper appreciation. And so I think that the relationship with housing, and particularly housing ownership, is going to have to change and maybe revert back to some of the things we've done in the past.
And I'm glad that you raised the point about supply. Very good points. And I just want to shout out National League of Cities, the housing supply. Are y'all familiar with that? Can we put our hands together for them? And that playbook has really opened the doors for many local governments to create an agenda around housing where they perhaps maybe didn't have the language or the, didn't have examples of what that vision could look like. And I think the two models that y'all present are models that local cities, towns, villages can adopt moving forward. And I know we're looking at all of our public land in the city of Houston and Harris County of how we can be a part of the land trust model. And even with a private, private industry model, how we can keep the costs low by leveraging our public land, right? So we can have permanent affordability and make sure Houstonians, those in Harris County, have a place to stay and shelter and build that equity. So I think the models that y'all are offering is a part of the future of housing. Can we put our hands together for our two panelists? On time. We made it on time, y'all. Their contact information will be available, and check your dance card, and so y'all can make sure that y'all meet them. Or you'll have a dance with Ben. Is that the deal? Is that the deal? Is that the agreement? Okay, wonderful. Thank you much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you one more time to all of our amazing innovators, to the indomitable Tiffany Thomas, to our two bald kings, Devin and Brian, killing it on stage just a moment ago, to Tara and Nancy and AJ, who are all amazing. We are about to close the live stream. And I just want to say thank you to the 500 people who joined us on the live stream. You guys didn't know that. I think if I can take anything from this portion of the event is, we had our retreat for the innovators yesterday, and one of our cohort members, Vicki, I don't know where she is now, was talking about how when you kill your darlings, which feels terrible, you also birth something new. And so I think if I can leave us with anything, the thing that I'm thinking about is, what can I let go of in order to birth and create the new thing? Because we're so far in that we can't afford not to take risks. We can't afford not to bring innovation to the table. And so how do we do that? And how do we let go of what we've understood before in order to make room for the thing that we have to do in order to make sure that all of our neighbors are housed? So thank you to everyone joining on the live stream. Great, now that we're alone again. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna